All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Lisa Parks. It's October 20th, 2025. We're at Brut Wine Bar in Astoria. And Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
First question is, why wine?
That is such a huge question. And I think it was just, like so many people and like so many of the other podcasts that I've listened to, it kind of started as a hobby. It started as a hobby to get me out of what was a very stressful career. And it just kind of grew into, something I enjoyed learning about, to being a hobby, to being a part-time job, to being classes, to being a career, to opening my own business. And that's the short version of that. But, wine it's so much more than just a beverage. It's geography and it's history and it's relationships and it's community and it's all of those things that I travel, all the things that I love, and it's all rolled into this amazing beverage. And I think that is truly what's exciting about it. You can't learn everything about it. You learn something new every day. And there's no right or wrong answers, all those things. It's great.
All right, let's talk about life before wine a little bit then. Tell us about where you were born and raised.
Born in Denver, Colorado. Not a wine area. But lived in Denver, suburbs of Denver, and then downtown Denver up until I moved out here 17 years ago. So, grew up in a family that not really drinkers, at least not my immediate family. I think it skipped a few generations. I've got some cousins that will watch this and love that. But my immediate family, my folks weren't really foodies. Mom liked her white Zinfandel in a box, which is great. But wasn't really, around that growing up. And then it just sort of became, as I went out on my own, started working in the hospitality industry, and that's where the bug really kind of hit.
So tell us about that. Tell us about kind of coming to sort of ending high school and taking the next big step.
I started, working in bakeries and restaurants in high school and early on in college. Just really loving that part of it, the service part of it. And then when I first went to college, I wanted to be a music business major for some reason. Was going to be a concert promoter and did that for about one semester and realized that was probably not for me. Skipped around a lot in different things, hotel, restaurant. I was in that world for a while and finally just said, I'm going to stop wasting money, wasting time, and just work for a while and then decide what I want to do before going back to school. So again, bounced around, was kind of lost, ended up working at an animal shelter for several years doing education, and loved the education piece of it and loved working with kids. And so decided to go back to school. Originally wanted to be a school counselor. And in one of my first classes, Intro to Psychology, it happened to be on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And that day kind of changed the course. I decided I wanted to go into crisis work. And so right at that point, kind of switched everything and did get a degree in psychology, but ended up working in crisis counseling for years. So it just completely switched what I originally was thinking, and that's pretty far away from concert promotion. But, found that, that was really, I was good at it. It was important work. But I had a professor that always said, if you're going to be in this line of work, find something else outside of it. Have friends outside of this. She said, have friends in the hospitality industry because they know how to care for people. And so for years I worked in a police department doing victim advocacy. So it was, we did death notifications. We responded to any sort of crime scene or sex assault, domestic violence. And again, I did that for years. It's important work. I so admire everybody I worked with, but needed something to do outside of that world. And wine became that hobby. And just, taking a few classes and just, fun, going to tastings, just little things to start, just to have that piece that was joyful and happy and not related to what I was doing during the day.
So before we move on with wine, I'm curious about that line of work. It's such a, like you say, such a specific and specialized. Tell me about
Different.
what was the education, training, preparation process for you, and what were the, I guess as you look back, what are the things you remember about your work there?
I think I did some internships in college working with Denver police as a victim advocate, and then ended up working full-time with Aurora Police Department. That's a suburb of Denver for years. And I mean, it was on-the-job training. It was going to outside trainings, working specifically with maybe domestic violence victims or things like that. I think what I take from it is the team of people that I worked with were the other advocates were some of the most amazing people I've ever met. Just huge hearts, angels. And even a lot of the officers that I worked with were wonderful. They specifically, anytime somebody was crying, they would call us because they didn't want to deal. They're like, please get out here and help us with this person. But, it was a tough industry to be in. It's very, I'm sure you can understand, it's very bureaucratic. It's very male dominated. It's all of those things. And so to be the liberal vegetarian in this world was a little complicated at times. So there was challenges to that. But again, the people that I worked directly with were just so incredible. And even though when we responded, we usually only saw the bad, we never were really able to see what maybe happened down the road to that person that could have been good. So we just saw a lot of really tough stuff. And again, much as that was important, it had a shelf life to it. I don't think it was something I could have done forever. I kind of wanted to be, I remember one of the last calls I went on, I thought, I want a job where people don't hate when they come in to see me. And this is definitely opposite of that. I mean, it really, yeah. So it's strange to go, I think my folks, when I first told them I was leaving this, very secure city job to go work at a wine shop, they were originally kind of mortified by that. I will say psychology background is helpful, probably even more now than it was then. It's always helpful, regardless of what I've been doing over the years. That's always been a good thing. That's always been helpful to have in the background. But
so initially, you mentioned wine, something you kind of dabbled in as a hobby to start with. Why did you choose? How did wine become the thing that you chose as your sort of outside interest?
I think right before I went back to college, I had some friends that were living in Paris, and I was able to go stay with them for about a month. It was the first time I'd been out of the country, and at that point was buying the whatever bottle off the shelf at the grocery store. I didn't know. I'm like, well, that looks good. Not really thinking about it. I had a friend, my best friend growing up, had recently moved to the Pacific Northwest, and she was starting to kind of get into a lot of the Washington wines, and so a little bit of that through her. And then when I went to France, it all changed. And I remember just drinking this great house wine places, and I loved it. And I finally found out, I'm like, what is this? And somebody said, it's Sancerre. And I'm like, great. No idea what that is, but I love it. And when I came back to the States and went into this little wine shop, was terrified, thinking they're going to be super snobby and I'm going to get laughed out of here, and asked for a bottle of Sancerre, and the guy pulled, this $35 bottle off the shelf. And I was like, oh yeah, no. I'm like, in college, I need something way cheaper. And I really thought they were going to throw me out. And the opposite happened. He kindly explained to me what I was drinking. He's like, you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc. and here's a really great Sauvignon Blanc from the next door region that was $11 or something. Try this. And that did it. And it took away that pretentiousness and all of those things that I was terrified of. It just took it away right there. And then I'd go back, days later. I'm like, okay, what else should I have? And he knew my budget, and he kind of started to get to know my palate, and I liked dry whites. And then it was like, okay, let's try a rosé, and that really just was so important, because again, I always thought of wine as being more of this elite thing. And so to have somebody just really explain it to me very kindly, and that's what did it. And then, so it was always kind of there. And then when I really needed that hobby, that thing to separate those worlds, and that was it. And it went from that to, by the time I left the police department, I would do like little email newsletters to the officers about what wines they like, Thanksgiving wines. So, I don't know. Maybe it changed some of their opinions on wine too. We'll see.
So tell me about that step, the step from leaving the police department and taking the first step into wine.
I worked at this little mom and pop wine shop in my neighborhood in Denver, Mayfair Liquors. At first it was a part-time job a few nights a week. And again, just kind of something to do that was different. Luckily, the wine buyer there, Randy, he was so passionate about wine, especially French wines, and really kind of saw that I was really wanting to learn. And so, would let me know when there were reps coming in with tastings. And there were times, if it was a really cool tasting on like one of my days off, he'd be like, hey, there's like this Burgundy thing. Do you want to go? And so it just really, he also was really able to kind of explain things in a way that wasn't obnoxious and wasn't pretentious. And he just was like, this is what you should have. This is why this is called this. And I realized how much I was loving those days, and how things happened around that time in the police department that made me know it was time to change and time to leave that world. And I just took the jump and started working at that shop full time. So no benefits, probably like a 60% cut in pay. I mean, my parents thought I was completely crazy. I probably was, but it completely changed. I was riding my bike to work, and I was living super cheap, and it was such a strange time, but loving the wine part, but also knew that working 35 hours a week at minimum wage wasn't going to be sustainable, especially for someone, I think at that time I was maybe in my mid-30s. I don't remember, but so then it was like, okay, I have to do something different. So decided to enroll in some official wine classes. There was a state college near me that offered, it was through International Sommelier Guild. And so jumped in, took the intro class, loved it, took levels 1 and 2, loved it, absolutely loved the classes. I think, like anybody would say, they're harder than you think. People would be like, oh, you taste wine and you talk about it. That's great. And I'm like, and I wrote an essay on German wine law. But yeah, you're right. So I probably studied harder for that than my undergrad. But that's, So, but loved it, and was around for the first time all these people that were super into wine and tasting groups. And it's like the whole world changed on that. And I don't know, that really was a huge point where, not just wine, but people that were, hey, let's check out this restaurant, and we've got to try this wine with this food, and all of those things that it was like, oh, okay. So I did that, but then realized now I have to make some kind of money in this field. And Colorado, it was time to go. It was time to make that change. And again, my best friend had moved to Seattle years earlier. I loved the Pacific Northwest. Started applying for jobs out here. At that point, I think somebody from Elk Cove came into the wine shop. and had me, has tried the lineup. And I think that was maybe some of the first Oregon wine that I had tried. And I'm like, well, what is this? Like this is incredible. It just left such a mark of, wow, they are doing really great things there. So started applying for jobs in Oregon, but when a person from Colorado with really not a lot of wine experience, I wasn't getting anywhere. So I finally got on with a chain store out here, which will remain nameless. And it wasn't Seattle, but it was Seaside. So, the first few letters, right? Moved out here, having never been to this part of the country. Other than Seattle, I'd never been. I had an aunt and uncle that at the time lived in a suburb of Portland, and I'd visited them a few times, but never been out here. So I moved out here, and right before I moved out, like a week before I moved out here, Krista Marchese from Montanore visited the shop I worked at, and I said, yeah, I'm moving out your way in a week. And so she said, too, the second you get settled, come visit. So yeah, I get out here, I'm working at the most soulless job I've ever had in my life. Honestly, like it was more traumatic than the police department. We can leave that in too, I don't care. It was not a wine job. It was, I don't know what it was, but it was miserable, but it got me out here. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is amazing. This area is beautiful. On my days off, I just decided every week I'm gonna do something to get me out of this and into an actual wine job. And so I would go to the valley. I immediately went to Elk Cove in Montanore on one of my first days off that I moved here, and got to taste through barrel samples with Rudy. And it just, again, I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. So that was just incredible to like be immersed in this, like, oh my God, here's this whole region that's into wine and making some of the most amazing wines, with always loving French wines and Burgundy, and then this connection. And it was fantastic. So I knew that this was the place. It's just, the job had to change. Yeah.
So you mentioned obviously kind of your life changing, and you're taking wine classes. You're surrounded by wine people before you move out to Oregon. I'm curious about the wine education process for you. What did you enjoy about learning about wine? What did you find was sort of the helpful way of approaching wine education? And what was exciting about learning wine?
At first I was super intimidated by blind tasting, but loved it. I just thought it was challenging and fun, and this game, and I don't know, I really loved that part of it. Loved so much of the history of it, again, in the regions, like, again, France is always that's kind of always been my favorite, and how, that's named after the area. Where here, it's the winemakers, the big on the center. There, they want you to see the place. And I think that, and just the whole concept of terroir and the place, and how, you're only gonna be making Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, little Aligoté, and Burgundy, because that's what goes well there, opposed to just let's throw everything at it and see what happens. And that was fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating. And so learning about the different regions and everything that goes into it, and how soil type makes a difference, and then taking that and going to, Elk Cove that first time and tasting single vineyard Pinot Noirs, same grape, same winemaker, same winery, completely different. And that was absolutely fascinating for me, because I hadn't really been able to do that before. And that's where, just right away, I was completely in awe of how the same grape, can taste completely different from a row to a next or across the street. So that part of the wine classes I loved. I loved being around other people and feeding off them of what they knew and their backgrounds, and all of us tasting the same wine but all having different ideas about it, and realizing that, you might think this is sweet, I find it more dry, that part. It's just, that's so cool.
So you're in Oregon, you're in Seaside, you're starting to explore. Tell me about your early impressions of the wine industry here and of the wines you were trying.
I think I kind of expected this area to also be like McMinnville, maybe in the wine and food, and at that point, it really wasn't as much. At that point, this is again 17 years ago, there was an awesome little wine bar in Seaside at that point called Yummy. And they had a really interesting wine list that I loved. But going around to some of the other, there was a shop in time at Seaside where I said, I'm looking for like a French rosé, and he's like, oh, we don't carry pink wines. And I'm, what? Like, I came from Colorado, we had a shelf, and I'm like, wait, what? There's no French rosé? And like struggling to find a French rosé, or, I was seeing some of the same few Oregon wines on the shelf that I saw at the grocery store, at the restaurant. And I'm like, okay, well, where are the other wines? And then you'd go to the valley and you'd be tasting all these crazy things. So, trying to kind of figure out where my wine options were in this area. I remember going up to see my friend in Seattle and stopping at a wine shop up there and just like bringing back like a case of French rosé, because I'm like, I'm gonna need this, can't get this here. It was weird, and that was strange to me. Just again, coming from Colorado and having these wine shops that had all these wines, and here there weren't a lot of old world wines. It was really, and I came because of Oregon wine, and I love Oregon wine, but I also really occasionally really need, some kind of a Vermentino or some random thing from Italy or whatever. So I thought that was kind of strange. But, it's like, okay, I'm, finding that. Again, the area I really loved, especially, Astoria was in its kind of earlier, this is 17 years ago. Fort George had opened maybe a year or two earlier. And that was really starting to there was Bridgewater Bistro, which is a beautiful restaurant, had recently opened. There were people starting to kind of do some things up here. There was a restaurant in Cannon Beach at the time called The Bistro that was pouring a French rosé by the glass, so I was down there all the time drinking that. There were these little things here and there that I was finding that I'm like, oh, okay, here's this. So it was just, I think, expecting this area also to be more of wine focused, and I was finding it wasn't as much at the time.
So you mentioned a job you weren't exactly loving at the time. Tell me about finding the next thing for yourself.
Again, with that proactive, I'm not doing this longer than a year. I refuse. I'll just, whatever. I can do other things. I can go serving again, whatever. So really trying to put myself out there. At the time, I became friends. There was an awesome wine shop in Cannon Beach. It's still there, called the Wine Shack. And the owner at the time, Dean, I would go in there on my day off. He loved Italian wines. He loved Oregon Pinots. And I would just talk to him and pretend I worked there. And Dean was so great about introducing me to a lot of the Oregon wines that weren't all over the grocery store. He was the one that was like, here, this is Brick House. This is, all of these things. And really learning a ton from Dean. Also, it turns out that Dean was really good friends with Bob Leiner and Matt Elson, that owned Galaxy Wine, a distributor based in Portland. And Dean knew how desperate I was to change my career and called me one day and said, hey, come down here. I have something I need to tell you. And right away, it's like I knew. I'm like, he's got an idea of a job for me. And drove down to Cannon Beach, and he said, yeah, Bob and Matt are looking for someone to just, be a sales rep on the coast, and they want someone that lives out here, and you need this job. And that was like the best day ever. I bought a bottle of something great and drank it right out there on his patio. I was like so happy, like, yes. And so, had the interview, met with Bob and Matt, and was hired on at Galaxy to be the rep out here on the coast. And that was like that changed it all again,
Tell me about the job, and tell me how it changed things for you.
Well, I was able to leave the job I hated in under a year, which was my goal. I learned a lot from that, but learned a lot that helped me probably be a better rep to chain stores. So that's good. I'll take that. But with Galaxy, because that book is so diverse, I've always loved champagne, so that's, fantastic champagnes, great Oregon wines, great Old World, New World, like that book was so diverse that I was able to just learn so much and be, in front of all these different wines. And I had never been a sales rep before, and so I spent a week in Portland and riding with some of the seasoned reps and, really learning what they do, seeing how they approached accounts. Was terrified about doing this I was handed like a kind of a scrap piece of paper that said, we think these are the accounts out there. These might be the phone numbers. We don't know when anybody's open. It was, at the time, Galaxy wasn't even that big. There wasn't a sales manager. It was pretty, I don't think there was a website. Galaxy was very different back then. But I think I called Bob, I don't know how many times a day with questions. He was fine with that. But it really, coming out here and being like trying to figure out how to do this with, at the time, it was a huge territory. It was from Astoria almost to Depot Bay. And, just no one can call you with an order. So it was like trying to hit all these stores and driving. And, there was one truck, I think, that delivered on a Wednesday. So I'm trying to do the whole route on Monday, Tuesday. It was just kind of a cluster, but at the same time, I liked it. It was like, okay, this is a crazy challenge and it's cool. And so many of the customers were great and patient with me as I tried to figure it out. And, had definite backing from Galaxy when things didn't go right. They would help me. It was just really a good, all around great relationship. And yeah, so just started, I think I started in the beginning of June, which not even realizing that I'd be going into like crazy summertime out here. I just didn't, I look back and I just laugh about stuff. But
what year was that?
2010? 2010, yeah, I think it was June 2010. 9 or 10, I think it was 10. And so yeah, it was just kind of crazy. And again, the route being so long, I remember driving back sometimes in the winter from, Lincoln City and coming over Neocani, and it'd be fogged in and I'd just be crying because I'm like, I've been on the road 18 hours and I'm like, what am I doing? And just, and everybody, the Portland suppliers saying, why aren't you selling more Italian wine? Why aren't you selling more French wine? And everybody out here is saying, well, we just want cheap Oregon wine and we want it to be able to be by the glass on our printed laminated list for 5 years, which left me 5 wines to sell. And it was really just kind of a struggle. I'd have a bag full of some really cool Spanish wines and people would be like, do you have any Oregon Pinot under $10? I'm like, no, I don't. That's doing the Oregon wine, industry a disservice if you do that. So that was challenging. I'd find those customers that loved those kind of things, and then I'd be thrilled. And over the years, I think people got to trust me a little more, where I'd be like, you know what, you can pour this crazy white wine from the Loire Valley because it's going to go really well with your food. And I think, I found those people that were willing to be like, okay, we're going to do that. There was an awesome wine bar in Manzanita that's now a wine shop, Dixie. And she was one of my favorites because she wanted those kind of unique things. And it was really fun to be able to find these people that were willing to try really different things. Or you can pour a really nicer Oregon Pinot by the glass and charge a little more and it's going to be okay. And so, that was good, to over the years increase the territory, sell more wine. Yeah, but a lot of windshield time. So I don't miss that.
What was the biggest key for you? What was the biggest key to making that job work for you?
Relationships. It's all about that. In any kind of sales or anything like that, it's relationships. Making sure that people knew I had their back. Like I wasn't going to sell them something that didn't make them money because it's not going to make me money. And if something gets screwed up with your delivery, I'm going to fix it. It's not maybe my fault, but it's my problem, and I am going to fix it for you, and I'm not going to leave you with no wine on 4th of July weekend. Like really building those relationships and getting people to trust me and learning from their experience, learning of how they, what's working for their business, eating at their restaurants, so I knew what their food was like, and how I could help them have wines that worked best for their staff and their menu, and just building those relationships. And so many of those wonderful customers, they come in here, I see them still. It's so fantastic when I run into them at a tasting or they come in here, and just those relationships were so important.
You mentioned kind of the unique challenges of selling wine at the coast versus selling wine in Portland or the Valley. Did it change while you were working that job? Did you find customers or restaurants' tastes were changing?
A little bit, yeah. I think there were people, like for example, Noni's is an Italian restaurant in Seaside, and when Noni's opened, she immediately came to the 2 reps that she knew loved Italian wines and said, "You guys get my whole list." All right, and so little things like that. There's a grocery store in Cannon Beach that opened that said, "Yeah, we want all the wines. Bring us all your Burgundy," or whatever. So really those little things of people, okay, we're going to try doing a sparkling by the glass, a nice sparkling. Let's see if it works, and then it works. So I think people were getting braver and braver and, about trying kind of different things and seeing what was going on. Then I had rosé everywhere. The days of no rosés by the glass, were gone, because I would tell people, put one by the glass. If it doesn't sell, I'll come in and drink it. I will drink all of it for you at your price, and it would sell. And then they'd be like, "Okay, you're not kidding me." No. I'm not. People like that. So, people just, again, that mutual trust and being like, "I'm not going to stick you with something that's not going to work for you, but trust me, this will." And it was so neat to see how that, and then just more people moving out here, people being more creative, people opening cool things and taking chances with their list, and, seeing the whole area kind of start to really, I feel like especially, I think Astoria especially, really changing. And things happening up here.
So what came next? What was next for you?
So loved Galaxy. The wind chill time, being in the car, that even though my route was a little shorter over the years, it was hard sitting in the car part was getting to me. Was trying to kind of figure out, something, what is next. Strangely, I was living in Cannon Beach at the time. That was kind of in the middle of my route. And where I was living, my next door neighbor knocked candles over and burnt the entire place to the ground. So lost, everything. I was doing a wine tasting when it happened, so I had like a wine key and like a lip gloss and my car keys with me, and that was pretty much what I had. So that was like, okay, I am now starting from square one with, and at that point, Bob and Matt at Galaxy were just great. They were like, "Okay, what can we do? Do you want to try maybe, we could maybe rent you an Airbnb for a few weeks in Astoria, where maybe do you think you'd want to live up there?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's going to make the route hard." And, just really trying to kind of figure out, like, what do I do? Found an apartment after quite a long time. Housing is a nightmare out here. So found an apartment in Cannon Beach, so decided to stay put there. And just, kind of started to rebuild everything while trying to run this route. And then it was, I'm trying to think when it was after that Galaxy sold. It might have been a year, I can't remember. But Galaxy sold, and at that point I just thought, I think this is all pointing to, I wasn't liking being in Cannon Beach. It was feeling so weird after the fire. And I thought, I think this is all just pointing to, like, it's time to do something different. And was spending more and more time in Astoria, just because Astoria was really like, all the breweries, and there were some cool restaurants, just all the things that were happening up here. I was like, I really think it's time to be in Astoria, but that's going to make it really hard to be with Galaxy, and it's maybe time to change that too. And it just, everything was pointing to that. And so, with spending time up here, thinking, okay, there's all these breweries. There was a whiskey bar that I knew was going to be opening. There's an amazing beer bottle shop that opened up here that was just taking over. I mean, he is a fantastic, and I'd be in there and I'm like, wow, this is just, you're hopping, it's great. And what was missing, I'm like, there needs to be this vibe of a wine bar here. And I talked to a friend of mine that had a wine bar in Cannon Beach for a while, and I reached out to her and I said, hey, can we meet for a drink? And she said right away she knew exactly what I was going to ask her. And I said, I need to pick your brain about this. And she's like, oh my God, yeah, here's my financials, here's all my paperwork, my business plan. She's like, you need to do this. And I had several friends out here, some friends of mine that owned a restaurant in Seaside for a while. They were the same thing. They were like, you need to do this. You need to open a shop or a bar. You need to do this. So I finally was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So just really started researching locations. I was still working for Galaxy. I hadn't said anything to anybody at the time, really, and was looking at locations up here and looking at, financially, business plans, all those things of like, is this something that could happen? Is this, people would be like, you're opening a wine bar in a beer town. It's crazy. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of people drinking wine at breweries. This is there. Walking around different times of the day and different times, just all the things up here of like, is this something that could work? And decided to do it and started looking for a space. Had originally really wanted to be over on Duane Street, which is where the bottle shop, Bridge and Tunnel, Fort George, the whiskey bar, there was a lot going on over there. Could not find the right space over there. And then this place kind of opened up, and at the time it looked completely different. I have pictures of it. And it's like, you know what? I think this is it. And just decided to do it. Scary, scary moment.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me about the decision and about the steps, I guess.
I mean, I had, pretty much already decided, if I can find the right space, I'm going to do this. And I had some money from the fire. Just, you don't rebuy all the weird stuff in your life. And so you don't buy 10 travel mugs. So I had some money from that and money that I had been saving, and thought, okay, I think financially I could do this if I find the right space, but I want it to be small. I don't want to have staff. I need it to be small. And had looked at this space. The friends of mine that owned the restaurant for a while in Seaside, Bob and Lori, they would go with me a lot of times and be, devil's advocate. He'd be like, nope, don't, maybe, no, it was great to have them look at it. So I saw this space right before I was going on vacation, and I'm like, okay, I need to think about it. And I'm sitting on a deck in Mexico, and I'm getting Lori to come over and look at the place. I'm like, I need you guys to go look at it and tell me if you think this would be good. And they both said too, they're like, that's your space. So as I'm sitting on this patio in Mexico, calling the landlord and saying, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And it was just so surreal. I'm like, oh my God, I just bought a wine bar. Oh my God. This will be the last vacation I take for a while. Enjoy it. But yeah, so it's just very surreal. And that was, my plan. I signed the lease end of February 2019. My plan was to open by Sunday market, which is Mother's Day. Had some foot surgery I needed to do that I wanted to still be on good insurance to do, and that was in March. So did the foot surgery, was trying to be pretty hush-hush about it until that, and then went and talked to Galaxy, sat down with Bob, cried. But, it was what needed to be, it was time. And really had planned, so my last day at Galaxy was July 1st, 2019, thinking that, that gives me a month of insurance, and I'm already opening later than I thought, but maybe I can get open by August. And then about a week or so into July, I started having complications from that foot surgery. Ended up in the hospital the end of July. I was on crutches from probably that point. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. It was just like the dumbest story ever that I'm on, trying to open a wine bar and I'm in a hospital in Portland. and they can't figure out what's going on, and then more surgeries, more back in the hospital. It was just like this, oh my God, what do I do now? It's just like this half-built wine bar, and I'm on I was painting like the baseboards by scooting on a furniture dolly. Like, it was so. One of my old coworkers from Galaxy helped me paint. She came down and helped me paint. I mean, it was just, I had another friend that painted my bathroom for me. It's just so crazy to think about that time. And it's probably my least favorite time in my whole life, even up against fire and delivering death notifications. I mean, it was awful. And just, a lot of like, what am I doing? Questioning, what am I doing? This is completely crazy. I'm trying to open a wine bar. I'm on crutches, blowing through savings. It was just, it was crazy. And there was another wine shop in town that closed. So where the shelves behind you were going to be a standing bar, that was kind of a last minute thought of, what, that's going to be retail. I'm going to do a little retail. But that also meant, more money out the door to stock the retail shelf. And so then it was like juggling everything so I could use my cash I had left to do that. And it was just a lot of juggling, a lot of craziness, trying to find housing up here, just all these crazy things. And finally found out I was going to have pretty major surgery to repair this whole foot thing. So I'm like, I just need to get open and get a few months in before this foot surgery. So my thought of opening Mother's Day, I opened October 30th, 2019. I was in a walking boot. And foot surgery was scheduled for mid-March 2020. Right? You can't make this up. It's so comical, really, if you think about it. It's so yeah, opened. People still that were here those original months still kind of laugh about that. They're like, you were in a walking boot for like the first year and a half we knew you. I'm like, that is true. Yeah. So, opened this wine bar, and it was terrifying. I opened very quietly. There's a picture of me in my walking boot flipping the open sign, and just super quietly opened until one of my friends made a post about it. And then I was busy, but it was good. And had some, those quiet nights when you start off. It was, November, and it was dark, and it was rainy, and it was a lot of like, oh my God, what am I doing? But by December, it was just hopping. And I had this amazing Christmas Eve and amazing New Year's Eve. It was packed in here for New Year's Eve that year. I did champagne flights, which everybody made fun of me for. They're like, you did flights on New Year's Eve? I'm like, oh yeah, that was stupid. I would never do that again. Walking through here carrying like caddies with, 12 glasses and a boot. And it was just so stupid. Like, I can't believe people put up with it. But just, the one thing that stands out to me is how this community from that, they were fantastic. Like, the community just were like, yeah, we're going to come into this shop. And the owner's probably, I don't know, she's in a boot. We don't really know her that well. There's a lot of wines we've never seen before, but we're going to do this anyway. And the community just, from day one, supported it. Unbelievable to me. It still just astounds me of the support. And when people got to know me a little bit and learned there was going to be this surgery, I had people immediately like, we'll get our server's permit. What can we do? Like, it was like how many people offered to help. And it was crazy. So, got through that first holiday, did an amazing pop-up event for Fat Tuesday, February 2020, with a local chef, did a Mardi Gras event, it was just, absolutely packed all the time in here. It was just like from like the first part of December on, it just was like, whoo! And, put 2 new kegs of beer on like March 11th, not even thinking for a minute. Like, we were all in such denial, I think, that things were going to get shut down. It was like, well, yeah, maybe a week or two, we'll be okay. Complete denial of that happening. And then when it did, it was just, you gotta be kidding. Like, what just happened? It was so surreal for all of us. And I remember sending a good friend of mine a text message because I immediately, like March 17th, I was a retail shop. I'm like, okay, I can sell retail wine. I'm just going to do that. And sending her a text going, I don't know if this is going to work. And she loves to send that back to me and be like, how's that working now? I'm like, it's working well. But yeah, I mean, it was just such a weird time looking back at that. Last year was my 5-year anniversary, and throughout the month, every day I would do a different post on my story about like something about the opening. And like looking back at that, of how crazy of a time it was. And for everybody, you know, we were all just so like, what in the world is happening? So, I don't know. It's crazy to think about that now. And, you know, all of us, I mean, looking at it now, I feel like I can look at it with these like really, what stands out are these more fond memories of how we all worked together and the community and all the things. That's what I remember from it, not as much the scary stuff. But, yeah. Finally got that foot surgery in July. Was on crutches then until mid-October 2020. So it was a lot of getting rides to come in. You know, people would drive me in a few days a week to try to open. I was on a, you know, like a knee scooter selling wine. Yeah.
It's quite a story.
It's quite a story. People are like, you should write a book. I'm like, in my free time. It's pretty funny. But again, I think it's that the takeaway is just that, like, you know, you've got to be able, I'm a control freak, and so it has really helped me learn to be more flexible and be able to pivot and not have the 5-year plan, because that never works, and just be able to kind of roll with things more, which is really important. Especially, I feel like if you have your own business, that is something you need to learn to do. It's very important.
So take me through from obviously mid-March 2020, things get crazy. You have your on again, off again with all the things over the next while. Tell me about getting through that, but also sort of coming out the other side. And obviously the pivot has already happened. You're not so much a bar as you are a wine shop. You have both those things. How did you kind of come back as things started to open up again? Okay. How did you take the next step and to kind of turning this into what it is now?
You know, working it as I did just retail from, you know, March 17th through probably, it was I think May of 2021. Astoria is not always known for being super, you know, like I'm seeing everybody in Portland with their parklets, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's not going to happen. But Astoria decided to allow 3 permits for parklets. My neighbors across the street, Todd and Terry that own Maritime, they got one for this street. And I'm like, oh, that's just going to help anyway. It's going to help the street. This is kind of, it can be a rough street. This is really going to help. And then they decided that they had enough outdoor seating, but I had 0, so they wanted to transfer it to me. Incredible. Unbelievably incredible. So I was able to get the outdoor parklet seating, and that was life-saving. That was in May, because people were fine with retail, but people were missing, we need to be together. We need to be together and drink and just be together. So I got the parklet built in May, and I honestly thought, like I think the part of when things were shut down that I was really missing and grieving was that sense of that gathering place and that community. And, you know, my favorite, to this day, my favorite part of this business is when people come in and sit at the bar and they don't know each other, and by the end of it, they're friends. Mm-hmm. And that to me is just the absolute best thing. And I thought, okay, well, there'll be outside seating, but man, I'm really gonna miss that. And what happened is that exact same thing happened out there. And I didn't see that coming. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden now that became the gathering place. And through that whole summer, because there weren't a lot of places to be outside and drink, that was the spot. And I would close, and then we'd all hang out there. I mean, that was just where we all hung out. And that really was life-saving. And then I realized something else is that people would have a glass of wine, and I had a pretty minimal wine list, some very small food options. I'm like, encourage people to buy food at another local business, enjoy it out there, that helps everybody. But what turned into a thing is people would come in and they were so used to buying retail that they still were. So they'd have their glass of wine and they'd take 6 bottles to go. And I'm like, well, this worked out, like, this is great. So I really hadn't seen any of that happening, and it just became a thing. And that still is. People come in, they shop, they have a glass of wine while they shop, and then they take wine to go. So coming out of that and seeing how, okay, now we're drinking out there. Now I'm going to let 4 people drink. It was this kind of slow. And then finally being able to just be like, I'm open, the bar is open again. And friends of mine that I had met during COVID that, for the first few months, I didn't even know what they looked like really because of masks, seeing them sit at the bar for the first time and being like, we're at the bar, and how cool that was. And how cool that was for the whole community as far as watching things reopen and having, I remember going to that 4th of July, it would have been 2021, Fort George did a big thing out at they call it the beer pier. It's out by their warehouses right under the bridge. And they had a big 4th of July thing out there and it felt normal. And I think that was what we were all missing, is that normal thing and seeing how the community was starting to get back to that. And it was exhausting because I think a lot of people had a really nice vacation during that. And those of us that didn't get the vacation were really tired. And we didn't get to stay home and binge TV for 6 months or whatever. I spent that whole time freaking out about my business and working and trying everything I could do to, keep things going. And so when things reopened, everybody that had been on vacation, was like, woo, this is great. And all of us had been working the whole time. We're kind of exhausted. And, I think I was trying to do 6 days a week. And that's when I'm like, absolutely not. No, it's going to be 5. Because I need a break, because it was exhausting. It was really exhausting at first. Good, but exhausting. So, yeah.
Tell me about, let's start with the place. Tell me about the setup, the vibe. What were you going for with the space inside and outside? And especially as things open back up again, what kind of atmosphere were you hoping for in here?
I think, when I first looked at the space, this building was built in 1924. And so, and Astoria, just the history of Astoria, the town had 2 major fires, so downtown doesn't look as old as it would had we not had those. But just the vibe of Astoria, I felt like I always kind of was going with kind of that Art Deco-y type, that, my logo, my color, it's what I like. I remember seeing a picture of some bar in, I think it was New York, that I just saw that had a bar that looked very much like that. So I showed the contractor, I'm like, that's what I want. Actually, the bar top, interesting story, there was a woman named Laurel Hood who used to have Laurel. She used to have a wine shop in Cannon Beach, and she has some vineyards. And when I told her what I was doing, she's like, I have this amazing walnut that from a tree that fell in my vineyard. Would you want some of that wood? And I'm like, yes. So I have a picture of her barn and one of her bottles of wine up on the, because I love to tell the story that is from her. That's from her. And that made it super personable. To have that is so important to me in here. Originally I'm not good at, I was watching Lydia's podcast. I'm not that good at decorating either. My home is not. And so luckily, again, the friend of mine that lives up in Seattle that I've been friends with since kindergarten, Amy is an architect and has an amazing eye. And so thankfully she came to help me. And she was the one that really helped, like she found the lighting and she really helped pull it together. Originally it was looking a little more industrial and she's like, you're a girl. Like, make it a little more, you don't want it to, make it a little more. It's a little now, I feel like it's kind of a little glam and industrial, which is also very in Astoria. Astoria's got some new pretty things and it's also it can be a little sketchy or a little grungy still, and that's okay. That's what makes it this cool town. And so really trying to keep that vibe of like, I don't want it to be a snotty wine bar. I don't want it to seem pretentious and unapproachable. But, I wanted to have just all those things. I want it to be where everybody feels comfortable. Somebody can come in and have a beer and feel fine. Somebody, I just didn't want it to be pigeonholed into this, well, we all go to girls' night there, but nobody else ever comes in. So I feel like the space, given that it's the size it is, it's small, and it's, especially at night, it just looks so cool in here. And I'm way busier in the winter because it's the perfect spot when it is blowing and rainy and dark. It's kind of the perfect spot to hang out. So the space is really, and there's things that I've still done and that I will always, I think with a business, you're always trying to change things and how can I, make it better, make it more efficient, add more storage. It is still just me running it. I have friends that will help on busy events, but I don't have employees. So I need it to be so efficient that I can handle it when it is packed in here. So everything has to be very, very dialed in for that. But yeah, I've always loved the space. When it is busy, people are always like, when are you going to get a bigger space? I have no desire to move. Again, I wouldn't go through that again for anything in my life. It's terrible. I would not go through that process again. I have no desire. And I don't want a bigger space. I love this space. I spend more time here than I spend anywhere else in my life, and I love being here. So. And yeah, like I said, when I look around at the space, I see so many things that other people, like my friend Amy, that, she picked out colors and, the pictures on the wall are from a trip that I took. And, there's so much, my artist friend Jennifer, that designed my logo, who's an amazing artist, made those for me. Like everything in here is so, I feel like, personal. And I don't know, just makes it feel homey.
Let's talk about the wines a little bit then. Tell me about building your list. How did it start? How has it changed? What's the key to you? What's the important part about your wine here?
I'm trying to think. I feel like I found one of the original wine lists earlier. It was printed. And I think I started with 2 sparklings. I always have 3 because Brut. Again, I'm really I love sparkling wine, and I feel like that was something that I was always pushing when I was a sales rep out here. Like, why don't you have champagne? Why don't you, And so I now have 3. I always have 1 champagne on and then 2 other sparklings, a rosé and a blanc de blanc or something. So I have 3 sparklings on. A handful of, I've always kind of started with a handful of whites, of rosé, some reds. I try to keep it, something for it's a little sweeter to drier, lighter to dark, something. So even though it's a small list, hopefully there's something for everybody. I feel like my price point when I first started, I was like, are people gonna spend $12 for a glass? And now that's probably my least expensive glass is 12. People will for a nice glass of wine because you're also getting a nice quality glass and atmosphere, and I'm not going to pour you something terrible. I'm going to pour you something really good. And so, just really trying to find something that would be great for everybody. My Pinot Noir is almost always Oregon because, again, that's why I moved here. I've done flights or special events where I've poured a Burgundy or something completely different. But again, that Pinot Noir that's by the glass is going to be from Oregon. Pinot Gris also I usually do in Oregon, either Pinot Gris or Chardonnay. And then everything else, I would say, kind of rotates. It's a lot of old world wine. Just because, again, I feel like that's not represented as much out here. And I want people to experience those wines too. Especially like Burgundy because of the connection. Like, there's such a connection to me with Burgundy and Oregon that I really love when people get to see that. And I love that. So the list started pretty small. Again, I wasn't planning on all the retail when I first opened. I was thinking of a little bit of retail that has grown. So now people can also open a bottle off the shelf. They can open and have that here. And I find a lot of people like to do that. They just will randomly come in and just pick something. Just by label, they're like, I'm going to try this one today. Okay. And so that's also getting people to just really drink different things that they wouldn't normally drink. Being small, I also had the option to be able to say, like, okay, you love a Chardonnay. Have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried an Aligoté? Have you ever tried, like, pouring people splashes of things that are outside of their comfort completely? And, maybe the person that really just wanted a big cab is drinking Bordeaux, and he's like, well, this is cool, yeah, there's cab there. So again, that like kind of education piece of like, you're right, like Malbec from Argentina, it's fantastic. Have you had one from France? Have you had one from Washington? So really just getting people to try things that they're not normally going to try. And if it's by the glass, they can have a taste of it. They don't have to commit to a bottle of it. And so people like that. I'm not gonna force them to drink something they don't like. And then realizing that the list was changing a lot, and so I came up with the idea of putting it on the wall. One of my business advisor that I work with, Eric, he helped me with that idea of let's put it up on the wall, and that way, whatever's coming next is behind it, so I can trade. So I can, in the middle of the day, the middle of a shift, if it changes, I can change the list. And people kind of like that. They're like, so this changes all the time. I'm like, it does, because I have locals that come in multiple times a week, and I don't want you to have to drink the same wine every day. That to me is very boring. So changing that a lot. I do have people that come in and say, now the cab that I had last year when I was in, I loved that. Okay, well, I don't know what that was. No idea. And that sometimes people find that, they're like, you mean it's changed? I'm like, oh, it's probably changed 30 times. But getting people used to small production, and that wine you love, you're right, it is gone until the new vintage. And that's sad, but I'll find you something else. And so it's just been, and same with the retail wines. Sometimes I buy something I like, and then for whatever reason, it just doesn't move. All right, well, maybe I'll pour it by the glass for a while and see if it moves that way or whatever. So just kind of trying to figure out what people want. I now have, when I first started, I didn't have this, but now I usually have an orange, some kind of a skin contact orange wine, a chilled red, something like that, because those are so popular now. Trying to kind of stay with that, and not just be that, well, that shop's okay for the coast, but actually, and I think just having other wine people out here and people doing things out here, it's making it, all of us have more success in those things of, people trying new and interesting things, new restaurants, new wine shops, new wine bars, all of those things just kind of elevates the whole industry out here. And that's great to see. I love that.
Speaking specifically to sort of Oregon Northwest wines, how do you find yourself when you're adding new wines? Do you find that you're discovering them, or are they being introduced to you? How do you add new things, new brands you hadn't heard of before?
I mean, a little of both. I have great sales reps that I work with that will come in and show me different things. I love the idea of things that are a little smaller production, that are more self-distributed. I'm a little limited on that just because of my space. I don't have space to, if somebody's coming out here kindly once every 6 months, I can't buy 6 cases. I don't have room for it. So I'm a little more limited on some of those things. But, I love working with a new distributor and being able to taste Sacred Shores. That's a great example of that. We're, working with Lone Wolf and being able to taste some of these really cool Oregon. I'm like, oh, these are great. And just even some past relationships. I worked with Ken Paolo for years, so making sure that I, have Walter Scott in here, and then meeting Jess through him, and all of these people that I've just had relationships over the years, and then, okay, you like this? Have you tried this? And like I said, I'd love to do more of that. That's just kind of also a time and space thing. I'd love to be able to spend every Monday in the Valley trying new things, but it doesn't quite work that way. So, but yeah, and I think I so love what Oregon's doing now. I love Oregon Chardonnay to me. I love talking to people about Oregon Chardonnay. Because for years, I feel like if a tourist comes in and they're like, oh, I tried Oregon Chardonnay 10 years ago, I didn't love it. I'm like, well, I'm going to open something right now and make you try it, because I think Oregon is doing such incredible things with Chardonnay. And so I think that part's just really, that's really great to be able to get, again, people to see that there's some amazing things happening. The Gorge, all the things going on in the Gorge, and some of those producers are some of my favorites. And just, again, putting them in front of people, and people kindly trusting me to do that, So that's been really fun to get people to see things. I try to keep a few labels that people again, I don't want to seem intimidating. So I try to keep a few labels. There's always going to be Alcove in here because, they were the first that I tried. So there will always be Alcove. But, just trying some of those, a few labels that people recognize, but then maybe I'm going to have one of their wines that isn't as recognizable. Or, I want their single vineyard Pinot when they're sparkling and things like that. So, yeah.
So tell us about what else you're doing with the shop.
So a few years ago, I realized that as much as I absolutely love being here, through opening and through COVID and through reopening and reinventing this and all of those things, that I probably hadn't actually put my foot into a vineyard in years. And that's bad. And it really hit me that I'm missing that part of it, because sometimes I'm so focused on the day-to-day things that why did I do this in the first place? And so it started by several years ago. I decided January here is miserable. It's cold, it's dark, it's rainy, people don't drink, it's strange. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do a trip. So I went to Portugal. And while I was there, I did a ton of social media stuff. It was like every day, this is the winemaker, this is the soil, this is where I'm staying, this is what they're doing, this is, so I did this whole thing. And then when I got back, I did an event around that. I had a friend do the food, and I poured wines from my trip. When I opened, the line was down the block. It was complete insanity. And then everybody was like, well, we're going to go to Portugal. Where should we go? So I had a little thing of these are the places I hit. And it just took off. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm onto something there. And then let's educate people about Portuguese wines. All right. So then I went to the Champagne region and did the same thing there and did an event around that. And people said they'd get up in the morning and be like, immediately look at Instagram, where'd she go? Okay, that works. Did an event around it. Went to January before, did Italy. Did a few kind of more obscure regions in Italy, went to Puglia, Franciacorta. So I just totally delved into, this amazing sparkling wine from Italy that is not Prosecco, that people they've not heard of this. And it's, for me, I sometimes struggle a little bit. Just small town is, I'm not anonymous ever. And that can be a really wonderful thing, and it can be really tricky. And so for me, being able to get out a little bit and wander around somewhere where nobody knows me, and it gets me back into being super excited about learning more, because that's such a big part of wine, is you're always learning more and talking to people that have been doing it. And so that's just taken off. Last January, I went to England to learn about sparkling wine and was completely blown away with what England is doing with sparkling, with wine in general, food and wine. I was completely blown away. So I love doing the trips. The part that I don't like is I don't like to drive. My years at Galaxy totally destroyed me for ever wanting to be in a car again. So I hate driving. So being over there, trying to hire drivers. So last year I thought, I need to figure out how to do this, but maybe I was hesitating doing a group thing. A lot of those tours, I feel like you're going to big mass-produced places, and I'm like, I don't know. But then I stumbled, a sales rep from Charlie from Domaine Divio came in, and I was tasting those wines and loved them. Went on their website to I'm going to go out there this weekend and check it out, and saw that Isabel does wine tours to Burgundy. And there was a spot open. And so it was probably a month out. I'm like, book? So I went to Burgundy in May with her and the group. And it was one of the best trips that I did, because the people on the trip were fantastic. And because she grew up there, it wasn't this mass produced. It was, we're going to go to these awesome wineries, and we're going to eat at local cafes, and we're going to talk about the history. And I just learned so much. And it was so fantastic. And I was completely, she kept calling them my Disney moments because like I'd be standing in front of like the wall at DRC just like crying. I'm like, oh my God, I'm here. So I just, spent the whole time in this complete, just like, I can't believe that I'm here. And so people have been saying, well, why don't you do tours? I'm like, again, in the free time I have, which is about 20 minutes a week, I can't organize a tour to Europe. So she and I decided, let's offer one to Brut customers. So I think it was maybe July that we've been talking about this. We put it together. We're going to like co-host next May. And she's like, don't worry. Let's start promoting it now. It can take a while for things to sell out. It's expensive. Fantastic deal for what is all included, I thought. Absolutely great. But she's like, let's start now, and it'll take a while. Well, it sold out in about 24 hours. So there's a group of us of Brut. I call them my Brut Squad. The Brut Squad customers, we're going to Burgundy in May.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so looking at another one with another company potentially for next October for like maybe Spain, Portugal, starting to work on that. Just trying to figure out how I'm not really like, I've also got to figure out how to make money at it, which I haven't figured that part of it out yet because I'm closed when I'm doing these. And, May's different than January. So, kind of trying to figure that piece out. I don't have the time to plan these, but how it can also be educational and benefit the shop and all of those things. So there's something there which I really quite haven't figured out exactly yet, but there's definitely something to be looked at. Last week, I'm going on a trip to Chile with Jeff, who's the wine educator at Soder, and he does trips, so I just joined his trip to Chile. I was like, I've got to do something in January, and I have no knowledge of that region at all, and so I thought it's going to be great to learn more about that. Yeah, and so the travel, I love to travel. It's one of my favorite things. It gets me out. It gets me learning more. But again, that piece of trying to also bring it here and bring that excitement and love of those things to my customers here. So again, there's more there, more to come on that. But
amazing.
It's absolutely love it. Yeah.
What else is on the sort of the to-do list? What else have you not done here that you want to do, or what are you looking ahead to with the shop?
The initial to-do list is pretty boring. It's like floor drains and stuff, but we're not going to talk about it. You mean today? It's hard. I love the idea of a wine club. Again, with the space I have, it just doesn't really work. So, that's something that like, I'm always in the back of my mind, like, how can I do something that's small? I recently, before COVID, I did flights, and that's something people always ask about. But when I got the outdoor seating, trying to figure out how that would work with glassware, it's busier, it's just me keeping up on things. So just in the last month, I started doing, I call it my flight club. And there's a lot of pop culture references in this business. But I had these awesome, a local woodworker made me these great like little tasting trays, and I saw it at a winery, little like beakers. And so people get their little one glass and their beakers. So my first flight club, I did Burgundy-ish, so some wines around that, and people loved it. A few weeks ago, I did a flight of orange wines for the Taylor Swift album release. Weirdly, that went over very well. I was surprised. That was so much fun. I think right now, people, more than just wine, people are needing a gathering space where they feel safe and happy, and they're allowed to be joyful, and regardless of what's going on in the world, they need a gathering place with people, and to be able to just be around people that they know and love, or that they're just meeting that they're going to like, and have that community, and that of just trying to continually think of ways to make that still be a thing, because that's so important right now. So doing more flights. Next week for my 6-year anniversary, I'm going to do a flight of 2019 wines that one of my friends, sales rep, is going to help me with. I always do a big Beaujolais event. That has been a thing since I started here. I usually do a pre-sale. I find a nouveau that I like. That gets tricky. But have that as like a pre-sale on that. And then I do, instead of a nouveau, I do all different, like Cru Beaujolais, different areas, and like a Beaujolais Blanc. And that's always been a really fun event. The amazing chef that would always do food for that decided to go open his own restaurant, which, if you haven't been to Daphne, that is absolutely brilliant. So the other chef that would help me out also just opened a restaurant, plug for Civil. My friend Rachel, who owns the Italian deli on the corner, she decided to do French food for Beaujolais night last year, and it went over very well because everyone wanted to see what Italian Rachel did with French food, and she knocked it out of the park. So I think she's going to do that again for me. So just events like that, especially here in the off season where I get more locals in here anyway. It's time to come out, have fun. I always do a huge New Year's Eve party. That's my biggest day of the year. It's just a giant champagne bash. There's a tent out there, even though some years it's still raining so hard it's tricky. But so like those kind of things. We do a big in February. Fort George, our local brewery, one of our local breweries, does a giant event called Festival of Dark Arts. It's a largest stout beer festival. Absolutely brings in so many people, and it's the best crowd. It's such a great weekend. It's always President's Weekend, and it's just such a great event for the town. So years ago, it's always also around Valentine's. So I do Festival of Dark Hearts, and I do an anti-Valentine's event, and that is pretty epic. People come for that every year. So just, it's things like that. It sounds silly, but it keeps, it just, I think that's kind of what we all need, a little bit of silly. And then, you come for some crazy event like that, but then you're going to get some really cool wine. And I don't know, that seems to work. So just more of those, more events, more travel.
I'm concerned you just broke the first rule of Flight Club by telling us about it.
I wasn't supposed to do that.
There's only there's only the one rule too, as far as I remember.
So I'm terrible. I guess I'm a terrible rule breaker. I'm not good at that. Whoops.
Congratulations on your 6-year anniversary, by the way. That's amazing. Let's look ahead a little bit. I want to know when you're finished with Brut, when this is in your rear view, what will have made this a success? What will have made this feel like you did what you wanted to do?
Oh, geez, that's it's hard to think of not being here. It's like really weird to think of that. I don't know. That's such a hard thing. I guess if people still, I think about, there was a restaurant here that closed during COVID that I swear once a day somebody says, "Oh my God, I miss the Colombian Cafe." And I don't know. I guess, but that sounds kind of negative. I don't know. That's such a hard question. I guess I just would hope that people continue to enjoy wine and drink great wine and drink outside of the box. And I don't know what I would do. I honestly have no idea. I mean, just go live in another country and drink a lot of wine. I don't know. I guess I need money for that. I have no idea. I don't know. That is such a hard question. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not good at looking that far out. I don't know. It always bites me.
Talk about the industry a little bit in general. You mentioned obviously kind of your initial Elk Cove, Montanore, kind of your initial, the Oregon places you knew originally. What changes have you seen in the Oregon industry in the time you've been paying attention to it? And what maybe happens next for Oregon wine?
Ooh. I love what people are doing. I just think, like the Chardonnay thing, to me, I think people are just figuring out Chardonnay, making amazing Chardonnay, just absolute sparkling. From someone that absolutely loves sparkling wine, look at this. I mean, at this point, if I had room, I would have an entire section of sparkling wine from Oregon, because I think the things that are happening here with sparkling is just ridiculous, absolutely great. So I love the idea of really getting people drinking Oregon sparkling. And that's very much could be a category on the list of, we're going to try this. It's up there in price a lot of times with some champagnes, but it's worth it because it's so good. And so really, I love where the sparkling thing is going in Oregon. like I said, I love things that are happening kind of along the gorge. Just some of those, I think there's some really creative things going on. People doing, things that are a little more, interesting. You're getting, Sangiovese from the Valley and Tempranillo from the Valley, Albarino, like all these things that are, again, not just what you think of when you think of Oregon wine. So I like to see what people are doing with that. I love some of the, second generation things happening now, and how, even though we're a newer wine industry, we're really, we're starting to see that length of, now you've got, second generation, almost in some cases some third coming in, and how exciting that is. And yet I feel like so many of the Oregon wineries are still so approachable and gracious. It's not the snobbery, and it's not that you're getting this just, I'll constantly have visitors come in here and say, oh yeah, we were just in the Valley. I'm like, where'd you go? And they always just tell me of all these great experiences that they've had. And that is so neat still. They're like, it's not the snobbery. It's like we met the winemaker, and it's just, that's really cool. That's, I think, very unique to Oregon.
All right, last question for you. What is your greatest accomplishment at this point, or what makes you proudest at this point?
Having this space and having, this sounds narcissistic and I don't mean it to, but people, like locals, refer to this as leases. I think a lot of times they forget the name is Brut. And I'm like, when you're talking to a tourist, you have to tell them that it's actually called Brut, or they're not going to find it. But it'll be a beautiful summer day, and people all want to sit at the bar, in the dark bar, because they're like, well, we want to talk to you. And I mean, I'm so honored by that and appreciative of that. These people that have been coming in since day one and still come here, visitors that come in every time they're in town, they're like, this is our first place we go. I mean, that is just, there are not enough words to say how grateful I am for that and appreciative I am for that. And I don't take it for granted. And just really having that space that so many people feel comfortable coming in. And that is important.
Awesome. Love it. All the questions I have for you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't talk about today that you're hoping to talk about?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Cool.
I think you got it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us.
This was fun. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your amazingly cool space.
Crazy story.
And your crazy story.
Oh my God. I was seriously on crutches for like the first year and a half I was open. So weird. Like crutches or knee scooter or boot, some form. People are always like, oh my God, you're wearing 2 shoes. I'm like, yeah, I have been for a while now, but yeah, it's so weird.
And in the midst of a pandemic. Too.
In the midst of a pandemic.
You're still here. Mm-hmm. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll let you off the hook.